We thank you for tuning in for this session of the Media Literacy Discussion Club. Don't be a stranger. Let us know what you thought about this program by liking it or leaving a comment. To join our other AMC online programs, subscribe to our YouTube channel, check updates on our website, amc.ru, and follow us on social media to learn, connect, and produce together. All right. So for today's presentation, I kind of, searched for, something maybe a little bit more, pragmatic to kind of draw people in to some of the concepts of media literacy, but see how they might be applicable to other areas. I think when people hear the word, the term media literacy, they think, oh, this has to do with hard news. But actually, a lot of the concepts from media literacy can be used in other areas of life. So this particular presentation is called How Media Literacy Concepts Are Useful in Other Areas of Life, such as Business. So, as you can guess, we will be trying to apply some of the media literacy concepts that I've kind of focused on in my seminars and online programming, and see how you could do this with financial information, for example. So changing the slide, media literacy, I would argue, is important for everyone. However, some people do try to just dismiss it as being like a niche kind of thing, right? An educational subject, or think that's not widely applicable to other areas of life. Change slide. But I would argue that understanding how your own biases function can help you eliminate blind spots, keep overconfidence in check, and make better decisions. And I think that's definitely applicable in many areas of your life. Media literacy is about being a better and more savvy consumer of information, and this can include financial information. Here's my father. Just look at him for a second. So he ran an insurance business for 34 years in New Jersey. And when I first tried to talk to him about media literacy a couple years ago, he listened politely, but said, well, that doesn't apply to me. He doesn't always have the best media consumption habits, which have led to not always having the most effective arguments when discussing real issues. And then some of his arguments in recent years have become a little bit outlandish, a little bit wild sometimes. I realized that it was because of the media he was consuming. He wasn't aware of the effect that it was having on him. He was uncritically consuming bad information, consciously not watching things he disagreed with, and mostly consuming news that conformed to his point of view. I don't think that any of that, by the way, is unusual. And my father, by the way, does watch these live streams. But this, I think, has changed the way that he views the world. His media consumption has impacted his outlook on the way things occur in the world. And, like I just suggested, I don't think that he's alone, which is probably why he feels that it's quite mainstream to have such wild swings in thought. There are many others out there who think like him, and he can easily find them among his friends online and on television. He acts this way because of something called confirmation bias. What is confirmation bias? It's probably the term that I've discussed most often. Probably is media literacy term number one, I would say. Confirmation bias is to change the slide, the tendency to search for, interpret, favor, and recall information in a way that confirms one's pre-existing beliefs or hypotheses. It occurs from the direct influence of desire on beliefs. I want it to be true, so I think it's true. And I will find information that will convince me that it is true. Changing the slide. We have a tendency to form our views first, and then look for information that makes us look right. Shouldn't be. It doesn't sound terribly surprising, right? Our natural tendency is to listen to people who agree with us. This should come as no surprise, right? I remember we had a person at the American Center give a presentation last year, I think in May or June, and he said basically, it's exhausting to put yourselves in somebody else's informational bubble, right? And listen to people who have very different views on the world, who have a very different perspective on the world. It's exhausting to put yourself into a bubble that is completely different than the information you're used to receiving. Our natural tendency is to sit there and, be comforted by, voices that we agree with. We kind of see kindred souls maybe in these people, et cetera, et cetera. And, I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with being in, some kind of media bubble, as long as you are aware of the fact that you might be in some kind of media bubble and how it can impact the way that you examine things. Because going back to my father, I would argue that his media bubble has influenced, how he sees some things. And let's also keep in mind, changing the slide, this quote from Kaylin O'Connor, professor at the University of California of Logic and the Philosophy of Science, in which she says, 99% of the things you believe, probably you have no direct evidence of yourself. You have to trust other people to find those things out, get the evidence, and tell it to you. When you're a kid, for example, I feel like the greatest source of health information came from my grandmother. And she probably got that information from her grandmother, and maybe it evolved probably over time. But if you were to go fact check some of the things that she told me when I was a child, I don't know if they would hold up to medical science, right? We get the information that we have from people that are in our orbit, within reach of us. More and more often, that is people online, that is people in the media, and so on. So just be aware of that, right? But to come back to my father, changing the slide, there's one area where he's super, super careful. Can anybody guess what that might be? It's his money. Right? When you're talking about his pension, how he spent, the money he lives on in retirement, his investments and so on and so forth, he's got a very different relationship to it than he does to, what's going on in another part of the world, that he's never been to, for example. His money is quite important. When it's his money, best believe that he will triple check, fact check anything involved. All of a sudden, he goes from, being like, well, I read somewhere that it says this, to having the most amazing hygiene when it comes to information. He'll consult the most qualified people possible and read as much as he can in order to make the best decision possible, because it's important to him. Changing the slide. This is also true for his health, but let's leave that for another presentation. Changing the slide. We have great informational hygiene when it's important for us, right? When something's a priority, we all of a sudden want the best information available, and we ask ourselves some difficult questions. Changing the slide. When it comes to money, my father would never just listen to what one person told him and share it, right? Thinking back, sometimes I remember when I was a little kid, I grew up in an Italian-American kind of upbringing. We'd occasionally be at, some kind of, just remember these halls in Italian restaurants, weddings, birthdays, all sorts of events, like this. My dad would talk to somebody he just met who was in business, and the guy would tell him something interesting about a tip, about a stock or something like that. And, even then, he wouldn't just go, call a stockbroker and say, give me 10 shares of that. He would take that information, he would research it, he would follow it carefully in the newspaper. He might ask a couple other people what they thought before he would even get involved, right? So even if it was an expert, like today, for example, even if it was an expert on the news, right, that he saw, that he fully trusted, with a piece of financial advice or information, he would double check it to see what someone else had to say at a minimum. Changing the slide. When he discusses financial stuff, all of a sudden, like I said, he has very good informational hygiene all of a sudden. He correctly attributes the source where he gets the information. He seeks second opinions. Changing the slide. In business, holding wild and unfounded thoughts and using them to build company policies or make decisions can have disastrous consequences. No matter the, occasional stories you hear about how, just taking big risks, can lead to great results. But most good risks are taken with a lot of good information behind them. So the danger, changing the slide, is that poor media consumption habits can contribute to poor decision making in other areas, even all areas of our life, right? Including business. Changing the slide to this funny dog. How could confirmation bias, what we talked about before, affect your decision making in business? So let's take an example. Perhaps, changing the slide, perhaps you believe that stocks do better in summer than at any other time of the year. Why is that? Is it because you've had success with this strategy before? Do you have more time to follow stocks at that time of year? Do businesses seem to do better that time of year? Is this because you like summer? Could come down to something like that. Don't ever, dismiss something for being too obvious, right? Is this based on evidence, right? Changing the slide. When putting together a business plan, you obviously want it to work. You want to show a confident strategy. But is your projection too rosy? Is it too optimistic, right? Is it downplaying other factors that could poke a hole in your strategy, such as minimizing the competition or assuming best case scenarios for market conditions will continue when the future suggests challenges on the horizon? Changing the slide. Just as media gets stories wrong, market analysts can miss trends. Economic crises usually, I put the word usually in there, don't just happen out of nowhere. Usually. Changing the slide. What are some things you could look out for? Changing the slide. The first thing, don't get caught in a filter bubble. Be conscious of them, right? When I talked about a minute ago, we a lot of us, can exist in different filter bubbles. As you can see in the picture here, everybody's consuming their information. They're getting their information perhaps through social media or other news sites, very similar to their beliefs, right? The guy with the mustache is getting information from other guys with mustaches, right? For example, other people who think similar to them, right? This is normal. This is how actually most of us exist. We interact with people who kind of these days, in particular, have very similar ideas about things. But the trick is, the most important thing is to be conscious of them. Changing the slide. So a filter bubble is a state of intellectual isolation that allegedly can result from personalized searches when a website algorithm selectively guesses what information a user would like to see based on information about the user, such as location, past click behavior, and search history. To deepen, the kind of definition, changing the slide. Kevin Merida, the former managing editor of the Washington Post, said, "I think that readers are, they're living in a world now where they can go find whatever will confirm their bias. If the Washington Post doesn't report, insert any issue here, right? The environment, business, etc. The way that they want it reported, they can go to a place that feeds their ideology, that feeds their view of the world, and those sites exist. That's why they're in business." Changing the slide. A good question to ask yourself: do you block out information that contradicts what you're doing, or do you use this as an opportunity to gain a new insight, right? Think about it in business, right? You're putting together, this can go for anything, right? A presentation, a report, you want to do it, but, what are you trying to do? Give the most optimistic version or the fullest version of that subject, right? A lot of times, I think, it's a good question to ask yourself. Am I leaving out some of the information that complicates it? Am I leaving out all the nuanced areas? Because, I think that the people would prefer to see a much more clear black and white version of the presentation. But, I think people make better decisions when they have all of the information, or as much information as is available. Changing the slide. How can being caught up in a filter bubble affect you in business? Changing the slide. For one, just on a day-to-day basis, right? Anybody who works in an office, searches for information constantly. And filters and algorithms, support that kind of work office type environment, right? Facebook, Google, and other sites are constantly making recommendations based on what you like, what you share, and what you search for. Changing the slide. The thing is, when you're doing a search, AI, artificial intelligence, isn't quite smart enough yet to figure out when you just want a quick result and when you're involved in a complex decision-making process. Changing the slide. In other words, what you're seeing when you do an internet search can be fitted especially for you without your knowledge, omitting all sorts of results. Perhaps these results weren't important to you, but who's in control here, you or the algorithm, which is guessing what it thinks that you want? Changing the slide. So how can being caught up in a filter bubble affect you, for example, in business, or doing any kind of research on a product, for personal consumption that you want to buy, et cetera, et cetera? It can skew the results you're looking for online, and it can leave out undesirable results and opinions, which could be very important in making a decision, right? Most people, I think, just based on, this is not empirical in any way, shape, or form, right? Just based on how people go about their, kind of purchasing online products, et cetera, their process is, they read 3 or 4 5-star reviews to see what they say. But I don't think people tend to take the really, negative reviews that seriously. There's good reason to, right? But there's some people who just, have it seems like their mission is to give, kind of negative reviews to products, and you can search that, right? One good way is, if you want to see if that confirms some kind of bias or style amongst a reviewer, you can double check to see what they've given other products, to see maybe if this is the average review that they write, or if they do this to every product out there because they're bored and they have nothing better to do. But it can really help if you also check negative information and weigh the negative versus the positive. And, you can, there's all sorts of ways to check out people who give reviews. You can read their other reviews. You can see how long they've been reviewing. You can see how many products they've been reviewing, right? That can also help you get a better sense of people leaving negative reviews to help you make a better decision. as well. And I think a lot of us are self-skewing to leave out undesirable results and opinions, especially when we want to make a quick decision. And that's understandable, but just being aware of what we're doing is more than half the battle for sure. Changing the slide. One possible solution to avoid predictable results is when doing a search, ask a question you don't know the answer to, right? Rather than asking a question in a search, that will give you a yes or no answer. Is it cold outside today? What is the forecast for the weather for the next week? What are some possibilities surrounding X, Y, and Z? But asking, is it a good time to buy X product? You're going to find a very simple answer very quickly, and that's probably barely counts as really having done any kind of in-depth research. Changing the slide. In all the ways Google tracks you and how to stop it, the technology writer David Neild highlights how well big tech gets to know you, suggesting they know where you go, what you buy, and what you consume. Changing the slide. Neild says, Google knows more about you than you might think. But what if they get it wrong, right? This is why it's really careful to what kind of search terms you put into Google, right, or any other search engine, to make sure that you're getting a variety of results and not just ones that help you make a quick decision to buy a product, right? Ask questions that do not have yes or no answers. Ask questions that are open-ended, that do not confirm what it is you're trying to find out, right? I mean, there's different things, right? Obviously, if you need to know the temperature in New York yesterday, there's a limited amount of truth there as to what that could be. But most things that we're searching for has a lot more nuance to it. And I encourage you to, spend a little time with that nuance if you want to make good decisions, both in your consumption of media and think about how that could apply to other areas of your life. Changing the slide. A couple things you can do. These 4 things, just to know that you have a kind of objective search process. This goes for your personal life, your personal consumption when you're researching a product, and as well as business. It could also apply to when you're searching for other things you can buy and so on. Use incognito browsing. This way, delete your search history regularly. Stay logged out if possible, and delete or block browser cookies. If you do these things, you at least are giving, you're giving your search engine and yourself a fighting chance to have an objective search. Because essentially what you're doing when you don't turn off these things is you're allowing the algorithms in search engines and different websites, as well as data from different websites that are shared amongst different websites, kind of form an idea of who you are and kind of do some of the thinking for you. Doing these 4 things, will help you be more in control of your informational and research searches. Changing the slide. So how confirmation bias could interfere with investments, for example. When researching an investment, you might look for information that supports your beliefs about the investment and fail to see the information that presents different ideas, right? I'll think of another example, right? I was talking to a friend who was sometime last year who was interested in buying a house, and they didn't want to invest. It was a very challenging process. It's a huge commitment, right? But they saw how important it was, since they were going to be stuck in a 15 or 30 year mortgage, to find out everything they could about that home, when it was built, the kinds of repairs it had in recent years, kind of its history, It's in the U.S. There's property taxes are a very important thing. How they've gone up and down can tell you something. Research on the neighborhood, and so on and so forth. All very important things, right? It complicates things. Obviously, this person was frustrated because they found what they thought was the ideal home several times. And then they found out, oh, there's a problem with the roof, or oh, there's a problem with the boiler, or oh, this is going to need a lot of repairs in the coming years, or oh, this neighborhood is trending in a certain direction, or and so on and so forth. Maybe the job market isn't as strong as they thought it was in this city that they were planning on moving to, and so on and so forth. It complicated their decision. But in the end, they found, a place that, it was a difficult decision. It took a lot of eliminating. It took a lot of not jumping on the first thing that looked good, but taking a kind of slow approach to making that big investment in the house. And they ended up making what they think is probably a very good, sound decision that, they'll be comfortable with for the next few decades while they're paying it off month after month. So similarly, when researching any investment, right, you might look for information that supports your beliefs. They tried really hard to find like, oh, this is perfect, I don't want to read too deeply. And they, in the beginning of the process, they would, it would always sneak up on them to see the information that, kind of complicated the situation. After a while, they learned to look for that negative kind of complicating information first, so they don't get too attached to something until they have a realistic picture of what's going on. So changing the slide, incomplete pictures of the situation, can cause, in confirmation bias, can cause investors to make poor decisions, whether it's in the choice of their investments, their timing. There's a variety of factors that could be at play here. For example, changing the slide, you assume that a certain stock will do well according to what you know. People around you seem to like it. The conditions seem good for it in the markets, right? So why not just go for it and invest? But is there something out there lurking, right? Is there a leaky pipe in the basement? Is there, something else going on citywide? Property taxes are going to go up a lot, right, in 2 years that you weren't aware of, and that's why the price dropped. Have you run your investment by someone completely outside your circle, right? So, for example, for me, I could do that with my father. He sees the world completely different than I do. He has a completely different set of experiences that he draws from in a lot of ways, outside the obvious ones of being from the same family, from the same country, and so on. In other words, would your information stand up in someone else's bubble, right? Choosing someone who is so different from you to kind of look at your information and get their opinion can be really useful sometimes. Changing the slide. An article on Investopedia suggests doing these two things. Seeking contrary advice, somebody outside your bubble, right? Who lives in a different bubble, exists in a different informational bubble, and avoiding confirming questions. So changing the slide. Seeking contrary advice. You can overcome confirmation bias when you acknowledge it exists. Same for information bubbles. And both, the thing is, it's not like you should be like, oh, confirmation bias is bad. I'm gonna deny that. I'm gonna get rid of it. I'm gonna root it out. Acknowledging it is the most important thing, because at some level, confirmation bias, media filter bubbles, there's only so much we can do to be 100% free of them. But one thing you can do, the most important thing you can do, is to be conscious of them. To ask yourself when you're making an important decision, is this my bias creeping in there? Is it, is this just because, I'm listening too much to people who think just like me and have very similar experiences just like me? So, for example, once an investor has gathered, information that supports their own opinions and beliefs about a particular investment, they should seek alternative ideas to challenge their point of view. and keep an open mind, right? It doesn't mean, you're doing it just to shoot down your idea, but, does it withhold scrutiny, right? If your beliefs, your ideas, does it withhold scrutiny if you put it up to somebody else? I mean, obviously, you're kind of playing devil's advocate at some level, maybe with somebody, but they get to ask you very important questions that make you, kind of really decide and make a good decision if this is the right strategy to take, for example. Changing the slide, avoiding confirming questions. Investors should not ask questions that confirm their conclusions about an investment. For example, an investor who wants to buy an undervalued stock would be confirming their findings, if they only sought info about the company's valuation. A better approach would be to seek more information about the stock, which can be pieced together to form an unbiased conclusion, unbiased to the best of possibilities, right? So to go back to my friend with the house, right? A better approach, rather than just like, oh, that's my price range, that's exactly the neighborhood I want to live, I'm just going to buy it. I don't care about all the other factors, and then you buy it, and then things start to pile up, and you get in all sorts of trouble. A better approach is find out information about what's going on in the city, what's going on with the job market, what's going on in the particular neighborhood, what's going on, perhaps with the local administration, some different initiatives they're thinking about, maybe talk to different people who live in that neighborhood, find out about the particular house, the street, what kinds of repairs there are, the house's history, all sorts of things, right? It helps you put together, make a better decision, right? You're never going to 100%, have an unbiased conclusion in anything, because some part of you is going to want to do something, right? You're still going to be, when you're, let's say you buy that house, you're probably still going to have some concerns, but you really want it, so you're going to go for it, and you've kind of weighed all the evidence, examined it all, and you feel pretty good about that decision. You're probably never going to feel 100% about any kind of decision you're ever making, but the more informed it is, probably the better you're going to sleep at night. Changing the slide. Investors spend most of their time looking for strategies that work, right? Or evidence that supports their existing investment philosophy. A significant part of your efforts might be better spent looking for evidence that conflicts with your way of thinking, which is called a good evidence-based investment approach. Similarly, if someone is seeking advice from you, ask yourself, am I giving them the full picture, or am I telling them what they want to hear regarding a project? Changing the slide. But just remember, right, because contradictory evidence exists, this does not mean that a project or investment is bad. To the contrary, it helps people make informed decisions, right? This is something that's really important with media consumption, right? I get the sense when I read social media, that people really feel threatened when you say, let's say there's an article on X story on this point of view from this perspective. I'm like, yeah, that's interesting. It's a little bit different than what X is saying, over here about the same story. And people, can get flustered and like, well, why are you penetrating my bubble? Essentially, why are you bursting the bubble? It's a hard thing to allow, contradictory evidence, sit with you and make decisions. It's a lot easier just to, follow one point of view and just go with it. But the world is complicated. News is complicated. Stories are complicated. Decisions are complicated, right? And the more that we accept this, I think the better off, in a lot of ways we'll be. Whether it goes from media consumption to making decisions that could relate to investments or business. Changing the slide. In the consumption of information, it always helps to look at things from another angle, and also make sure you understand the sector, the company, all the factors that are involved, not just the ones that confirm that something is a good idea. Changing the slide. In other words, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Changing the slide. Just as you wouldn't read one website to learn deeply about a story, you probably need to consume diverse sources of information before making a business decision, right? Let's say you want to find out more about COVID-19, right? You're not going to read just one source of information if you want to be truly informed, right? You want to get as broad of an outlook as possible on issues to be able to say that you've learned something, right? So say that you have a good sense of all the issues that are out there, the ideas that are out there, right? This goes for decision making as well as it does for media consumption. Changing the slide. But also, fact checking isn't just important for news, but also for businesses, right? Fact checking, for example, can limit damages to businesses and individuals. Changing the slide. So, for example, reputations are on the line in the competitive business world, and it's important to have control of your image and narrative, whether you're a large business or an individual entrepreneur, right? A single mistake can damage credibility. It can be hard to get back. And in today's viral environment, this can all happen very, very quickly. Changing a slide. So another question to ask yourself, right? We kind of mentioned negative reviews of products a little bit earlier and how to kind of fact check those and who's writing them and so on and so forth. But are negative press or reviews about your company on different websites fake news, or are they critical information you should be paying attention to? Similar to media, right? If there are other kinds of stories out there that don't conform to the path that you're seeing, right? It's very easy to just dismiss them. But you're making a better decision. You're being a better media consumer and consumer of information if you read alternate points of view, and then kind of factor that into what you already know. As I've said several times, people often these days look for they read opinion pieces before they go to kind of like the fact-checked kind of articles and other news pieces first. When you go to opinion stuff first, it used to be the other way around. You would read the hard news, and then maybe you'd read the opinions to kind of deepen your analysis of a story or an issue, right? You should never kind of block out different points of view. Is the main thing I'm asking you, kind of suggesting here. And this goes as well, with business, right? If there are negative press, feedback, reviews, and so on, ask yourself, is this something you should be paying attention to? Changing a slide. We're almost done here. Information online is generally free, but just as good journalism is worth supporting, maybe it's best to use paid-for services, such as those provided by Bloomberg, Goldman Sachs, advisors, other financial packages that are not dependent, on subscriptions. They're dependent on subscriptions, not clicks, right? And most international reputable financial newspapers, although not all, such as the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times, operate on a subscription service. Although just a caveat, just because you're paying for something, obviously, is no guarantee of quality. That's all for me. I hope you enjoyed it. I thank you for your attention, and I am ready to discuss any questions you may have. Okay. Okay, question looks like it's coming in from Grapefruit Orange. Nice to see you again. Would you recommend using different search engines? Sure. Yeah, it's interesting. Each search engine, I think there's this idea that all search engines are created equally, but they're set up slightly differently, right? I one time did an example where I put through different search terms through like 4 or 5 different search engines, and the results were quite different, for sure. So obviously Google Yandex is in the top 10 in the world now. They're good ones, but yeah, if you're frustrated with your results, there's a couple things I would do. Yeah, changing the search engine is a good one, but making sure you've cleared your search history, to just make sure that that's not influencing, how you looked at things kind of historically over the last few weeks or months, is another good one. Changing the search terms is also really important. I would say, this is coming back to when I was teaching at the University of Massachusetts. I would tell students, you should probably change your search terms 4 or 5 times, just to see what's out there. Don't ever be satisfied by, you did one search and you got some responses. If it's a big complex decision, if you have to know what the weather is in New York, you probably don't need to do 10 different searches. But if you're researching something that's a little bit complicated, that's kind of involved, it never hurts to try to see, what different things are, because, you could be missing that one key word that ties you into all sorts of information. So definitely use different verbs, use different keywords, vary it up, use different synonyms. You will definitely get different results. And this is true with search engines as well. But I'd say the search terms is probably the most important factor. But also, I would use different search engines to try to see what you can find, as well as making sure that your browser history has been emptied, so that you're at least somewhat more in control of the process. Okay. Okay. You're welcome. Okay. So let me know when I should do my outro. Okay. I can go. All right. We thank you for tuning in to this session of the Media Literacy Discussion Club. Please don't be a stranger. Let us know what you thought about this program by liking it or leaving a comment. To join our other AMC online programs, subscribe to our YouTube channel, check updates on our website, amc.ru, and follow us on social media to learn, connect, and produce together. I am Joe Crescente, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you.